It's Wednesday, October 16th, 2024. This is Ashton Ellett with another installment of the Russell Oral History documentary series produced by the Richard B. Russell Library for Political Research and Studies. We're here today at the Russell Building Special Collections Libraries on the campus of the University of Georgia. And I'm joined in the Bob Short Oral History Studio by Ms. Kathie Klass. She's a graduate of California State University at San Jose, which is now San Jose State University, where she earned a bachelor's degree in home economics and a master's degree in health sciences with an emphasis in consumerism. In addition to a brief stint teaching personal finance at Cabrillo College and De Anza College, she began a lengthy career in government service as a political appointee and as a career civil servant in California as well as Washington. During her time in Washington, Ms. Klass worked in various capacities at the Department of Transportation, Postal Regulatory Commission, Department of Agriculture, and Department of Commerce. She is also closing in on 50 years as a real estate magnate. Kathie, thank you so much for taking the time and coming all the way from Las Vegas to sit here and reminisce about your career in government service. So let's start at the beginning. Tell me about growing up out west, out in California.
Well, I grew up in Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley in the 50s, and it was California, Hollywood, all the tourist things.
A movie star on every corner?
That's right. I mean, you could occasionally see them. And then I did 2 years at a community college, and then wanted to live in Northern California, so I went to San Jose State. And I always liked helping people. And so that's where I became sort of a consumer advocate. And I had one summer school class where our job was to put together a pamphlet, and everybody interviewed various agencies. And I took that with me when I was job hunting. And my first job out of college was I was a rehabilitation supervisor for special needs kids, teaching them how to do competitive employment. But I got done at work at 4, and then I went and volunteered for the Santa Clara County Consumer Affairs Office. So when a job opened in Santa Cruz, I applied, and I spent my first 7 years in Santa Cruz, California, as the consumer advocate for the county.
Well, taking a step back, what did your parents do growing up? Well, you were growing up, I guess.
So my dad was an accountant.
Okay.
So that's where I get my business sense. I always had a good business sense, which I think was helpful in being a consumer advocate. And my mom was, my brother was completely disabled. He got sick at 4 months and was couldn't function without assistance. And so he was placed in a state hospital at 13, where he was very happy. He did not want to come home. He liked that environment. And he could communicate with his eyes, but he couldn't talk. So the one time he came home to visit, he cried. He was afraid he wasn't going to get to go back. And so my mom became a graduation evaluator at Cal State Northridge. So that was my upbringing. And, when you have a special needs sibling, you look at the world very differently because there's a lot of discrimination. And so, you're very sensitive about who you bring home or who you associate with. And you tend to, and I always like to help people. So
you got a degree in home economics. What was the program of study for a home economics degree when you were in college?
It was more traditional, and I actually started out in nursing and couldn't handle my own blood. So that was an easy...
There you go.
It was an easy transfer, but there was a lot of science, which wasn't necessarily my strong suit, but it was foods and nutrition, textiles, and consumer. It was the beginning of the consumerism, and that's what I was interested in, was the consumer part of it. And that's what I pursued. I also liked foods and nutrition.
Sure,
But-
which help you out later on in your
Right.
in your career.
And so when I decided to get my master's, I liked one of the professors in the health science department and talked him into letting me emphasize in consumerism.
Tell me about the 1970s, late 60s, early 70s. This is the consumer advocacy movement, with Ralph Nader and others
Right.
who are really coming into bloom. Tell me about how that manifested, sort of at the local and county level, where you were
That's
operating.
when it started with government, state, county government agencies, where, and because it was new, I had lots of opportunities. The person who started the office in Santa Cruz County became a state assembly person, and that's how
I'm
we
beginning to see how this is all unfolding now. Okay.
yeah, we didn't have a county lobbyist, so I got to go up to Sacramento quite often and testify in legislation, and we put together a group of local California consumer agencies, the California Consumer Affairs Association. I was actually the first president of the little group.
Okay.
So we would share information. And one of the most important things that kind of came out of that was it took us 10 years, but it was one of the first lemon laws that got passed.
And this is automobile purchases?
Yeah, for automobiles. And actually, I think Ann sent you a picture of Jerry Brown signing the
Yeah,
bill.
I don't know if it was from the Sacramento Bee or one of the Bee
Right.
one of the Bee newspapers out there.
I came across it recently, and I had her send it to you. But that was very hard, and you learned really quickly what was happening, and this is my opinion, in helping to create lemon cars, is that they did not have replacement car parts for new cars. So if a defective part got into a new car, often the car would be driven till it became a lemon, because the whatever I'm not an engineer, but whatever the part was affected other
It would
parts.
be a cascading failure. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so anyway, but it took us 10 years to get it through. And I remember when it passed, the chairwoman, Sally Tanner of the California, the Assembly Consumer,
I think she was in the photograph
Yeah.
with Governor Brown.
right, chairman of the Consumer Committee, we got permission from Willie Brown to send her yellow balloons to the floor when they did the final vote. And she was so worried that he would be upset. But we knew we had to get permission of the speaker before we sent flowers. But we were all pretty excited about that because it was hard work. And whenever you mention it to people, they are pleased about it. And, for years they had arbitration programs. And one of the things that I did in Santa Cruz before I left, I really liked arbitration, and I was moved to the DA's office, and I started a legally binding arbitration program with the DA, and I ended up also doing community disputes, and the attorneys in the DA's office appreciated that because we could get an agreement from somebody, and they didn't have to go to court with that.
What would be an example of something that would go to arbitration as opposed to going through the
Small
court
claims
system?
court or
Yeah.
court system.
Yeah.
One of the things was a kid with a BB gun who was shooting up the neighborhood, and I had one of my I had like 50 volunteer arbitrators, and they came to an agreement, and the father was told if it happened again that he would end up in juvie, and it did happen again. So those were the kind of things. And as part of the training, because Santa Cruz at that time was a population of 200,000, it's much bigger today, was that you sat through small claims court, and then you would write up like what would be an agreement. And my friend who had worked in the district attorney's office would look at it and make sure that he was comfortable so that the people would have actual experience of writing an agreement up that would be able to be upheld in the court.
Okay.
So, and the consumer things were, mobile home parks were big back then. Some of the disputes with the ownership of a mobile home park, like rent increases or things like that, that you could discuss. Mm-hmm. But those were the type of things. Another case was really sad. One of the neighbors stopped talking to a neighbor, mm-hmm. and so they started having issues over the fence because she was feeding too many birds, and it was causing a problem. So what happened was it was because they weren't inviting her over anymore that she was unwilling to cooperate. And so she agreed to take her bird feed to the park. And so those were the kind of things that would come up through the district attorney's office that they would be happy
right.
to turn over to the arbitration program, because it took time. You know, it was a volunteer program. It took time away, but they could we could show the county supervisors how much money it saved in the DA's time. And at that point, unfortunately, Santa Cruz was the murder capital of the world practically because of all the marijuana things. And there was some. So
I had no idea.
So the DA's staff was spending a lot of time on some of these kind of cases. So
okay. So, well, now that you mentioned that, I guess this would have been the era of the serial killers in the Bay Area,
right?
And yeah, another topic for another day.
Right.
But in terms of consumer affairs, was California on the cutting edge of these things? Like as with lemon laws,
Right.
I'm not sure. I don't know about California. You can tell me, but. Automobile franchise, dealerships are a very powerful lobbying group in Georgia and elsewhere.
That's why it took 10 years.
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask. Were those the primary impediment, I suppose, to the laws? Yeah,
and I mean, in the end, in my opinion.
Sure.
Okay, I mean, that's one. I'll give you backtracking. We had the Bureau of Automotive Repair in California.
Okay.
And one day I had an auto mechanic come into my office, a big, tall, 6-foot guy who was in tears because somebody had filed a complaint to him. And I sat down and he explained to me what happened. It was something with the car. It was a car situation that he had repaired it right. But again, a kind of a lemon law situation. Mm-hmm. And so I walked him through of how to reply to the Bureau of Automotive Repair, explain what happened, and so that they could see that he did not commit fraud, that he had done what he said he would do,
right?
Because he had all his documentation. So I would do. I mean, it was. You want to be fair. Just because somebody comes in with a complaint doesn't mean that they're justified.
Sure.
And so this was a good example, and a good example of why you needed a lemon law, is because you could repair something, but if you've had a defective part since the beginning and it's caused the whole system to go out. So we worked really hard on that. And that's when they started having, arbitration groups that would sit. One of my friends was in charge of several arbitration groups, and I helped her find arbitrators that would sit there and listen to the cases. But you have to be objective. And, that we had one person who chose not to be objective, and she couldn't be an arbitrator anymore because if you want it to work, it's got to be a legitimate complaint. And they put together how many times to keep a record, how many times you've been to the dealership, how long the car was out of service. So you had a tracking record.
Right.
And so that was all part of it. And to this day, I'll mention the lemon law, and I meet people and they'll say, it doesn't matter if you're liberal or conservative, they're happy to have it because that's a big expense.
That's a very big. Maybe the perception of your office or the consumer affairs groups, was the public perception that you or your colleagues were anti-business, or is that what you were really trying? Did you have to push back against that perception that you were a bunch of do-gooders out to punish businessmen or something like that?
In Santa Cruz, it wasn't as much of an issue because we were interviewed by the local newspaper, like if there were mobile home problems or whatever the problems were. We were pretty neutral. And when I started the arbitration program, I had a lot of business people that were arbitrators, so that we were small enough that, sure, there were some people that would think that, but if you called up and were reasonable, like on the utility companies, if on Friday they threatened to turn off your power or water, I would call them and say, okay, this person's going to be in by Monday, and with the money, can you hold off for the weekend? So, I mean, we weren't unreasonable.
Right.
You would call, make our arrangements, and tell the person, okay, the utility company's not going to turn off your water if you show up with the bill and by Monday. But if you don't, then they're going to do it. I mean, you didn't go there with saying, oh, you're totally wrong, you can't turn off their electricity, but you would work with them.
Right.
And so we had that kind of reputation. And then we talked to all the service clubs.
A lot of Rotary and Kiwanis clubs.
Right. We talked to them. But also, I mean, a lot of times it was mail order companies and companies that were notorious for taking advantage of consumers that were probably more of a challenge. And so, in fact, when I was interviewed just before I got the job in the Clinton administration, I was asked about Ralph Nader. And Ralph Nader did open up the world and made people aware. But I said, legitimate business is not in business to take advantage of consumers. They're in business to make money. And sometimes they set up policies that ultimately end up hurting consumers, but usually they'll work with you. It's the fraudsters or people that are out to do fraud that are more of a challenge because you can't work with them.
Right. The fly-by-night. Yeah, every time there's a hailstorm and these roofing companies.
Or the Williamson gang. So that's always been my philosophy is I accept that business is in business to do business, but if you take advantage of the consumer, you're going to have a problem. And so I always sort of dealt with business in that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about your working experiences with Governor Jerry Brown, and because he was a very unique leader. And tell me about those experiences, and then we can talk about the transition into the.
Okay. So Jerry Brown put together the first set of public members on regulatory boards. So when I was appointed to the collection board, it was a ceremony of all of us that have been appointed to the first public members on regulatory boards. And so he was a very bright man, an ideologue, a fiscal conservative, which people don't realize. And his big deal was making sure for a balanced budget. That's what he cared about. So he was very responsible. So I had two opportunities. I was appointed to two boards under him, the Collection Agency Advisory Board, which I worked on with a lot of consumer leaders around the country for the the FTC's collection, where you can't call people after a certain hour and the certain things that they did. So we were part of a national-wide group of people that testified on that. And so that board was very interesting. And then I did the cemetery board, which was very interesting. And one of the stories was two things that happened. One was the Hollywood Cemetery, which is a tourist attraction in Los Angeles. And they have, when you go to a cemetery, part of the fees that you pay go into a trust fund so that to maintain the cemetery. And interest rates were 21%, but the guy that ran the Hollywood Cemetery didn't know how to invest his money. So you would go through there and there'd be open grave sites, and it just was in really poor condition. So we had to bring him in, and he was an older gentleman, and he had no idea how to invest. And it was like, interest rates are high enough that these funds should be in a interest earning account. So those are the kind of things. And then the other problem that we would see is people cremating people before they have the death certificate. So there was no way to go back and see if there were foul play. So those are the kind of things that we dealt with as a public member. And then in the 90s, I was on the acupuncture board that I was appointed by the state senate. So each house got a public member that they got to put on.
Excuse my ignorance, but what was acupuncture such a big thing that you had a bicameral board to oversee?
No, it was the regulatory board.
Okay.
And then each house, my appointment didn't come from the government, it came from the Senate that time. And it was part of the medical community, and it was, I mean, it's big now, and and I truly believe in, I hate needles, but I truly believe in acupuncture, because if you go in, it can take pain away. And I did actually had some issues, and I did have acupuncture, which was very helpful, because one of the issues that came up during that is they no longer wanted to pay for models. And they didn't stick models when you were going through your exam, but they put dots.
Sure.
And which was so important. And so one of the things that happened was one of the exams, because they couldn't decide on whether they were going to use them or not, was going to be delayed. And so we had a special meeting, just kind of the public interest part of this. And they said, no, we're going to continue to have models. Well, I took advantage of the opportunity and let one of my friends on the radio know. So I gave them an exclusive. So it went out in Los Angeles, and you knew that where most of the schools were, you knew that just on one radio station, the students would find out that their exams are going to happen. So those are the kind of things that as a public member you would do. You weren't a member of the industry. So that was probably, looking back, that was my favorite board that I served on.
Interesting.
Yeah. Just, and whenever, like if I'm on a cruise ship now, I'll go have acupuncture to get rid of
There you go.
some pain.
Well, tell me how you went from this local and state focus all the way on the West Coast to Washington D.C. How did that happen?
I also was appointed to an advisory board for the Consumer Product Safety Commission in the 80s, 70s, and I fell in love with Washington. And so I applied for a job with the Drug Selling Education Foundation that Ann Sweeney works closely with, because they've done a couple of things, and spent a year there. And then I got the appointment to the Consumer Advisory Board under Jerry Brown.
Okay.
So so I was in D.C., that's where I met Dan. Then I went back to California for 4 years. 5 years and ran the Consumer Advisory Council, which I loved because that was a statewide agency.
Right.
I had a big budget of $250,000,
Ooh.
which
Adjusted for inflation, that's quite a bit of money back.
and so I had a board of business and consumer people, a senator, and a assembly person that I worked with. And one of the things, Sam Farr, who was a state assemblyman and then a congressman, said to me, well, I think you should do a book on a guide to lobbying. And so I had the council do that. I had a friend who was in grad school and needed a project, so I wrote it up and his company printed it for me.
Okay.
So those are the kind of things that you have to do when you're in the consumer business. You don't have money to do those kind of things. So those were the kinds. So we would have public meetings and public hearings on consumer issues affecting California. Like item pricing was a big issue at that point.
Item pricing?
So back in the 80s, as computers came in, products were individually priced when you went to the supermarket. Oh, I'm sorry. Anyway, I just turned off my ringer. So you'd go to the grocery store and everything had a price on it.
Right. Oh, sort of like Hobby Lobby. Or did it have a price? Or
No, like all your cookies would have a price.
Okay.
A sticker.
I see. Okay,
And
I'm
not
with
a
you now.
shelf price. And
I'm
so
with you
that
now.
was a big issue, and we were fighting to keep that.
Okay.
And obviously, it's gone by the wayside, and sometimes you can't find a price on stuff. But that was a typical issue that the Consumer Advisory Council would listen to. And then we'd always have public comment. And so those were the kind of things that we did. And the lemon law was passed during that period. So I would go over and testify before the legislature often.
Now, is that the background, the experience that led you to the U.S. Department of Transportation?
So I worked on the Clinton campaign.
Okay, so this is 19. So you didn't work on the Jerry Brown campaign?
Oh, yeah. But, I mean, you asked
So you went from Jerry Brown's presidential campaign to...
Oh, yeah, actually...
Because I think Governor Brown came in late in '92 as sort of the anti-Clinton candidate.
In '86 when he ran, of course, I supported him. He was running for Senate in '86.
Okay.
Okay. And would have made a great senator. So I didn't work on Jerry Brown's campaign.
Okay.
But I did work on the Clinton campaign.
Okay.
But in between that, I went back to Washington, and that's when I worked at Home Builders, which isn't on my resume. We don't need that one. But I came back and ran the Consumer Foundation for David Horowitz, who was a consumer reporter out of L.A. And that was kind of an experience. And I worked in Washington on telecommunications issues, and so did a lot of those things with the foundation. And then obviously worked on the Clinton campaign. And then being a consumer advocate or being somebody who has to figure things out, because I'm not a big corporate funder. I got myself a volunteer job in the White House at the comment line.
Okay.
And so whenever I came to Washington, I would spend every day working the comment line. And now I'd take a break and go talk to people. And I met a woman, and I had done some work with John Emerson, who was head of personnel at that time, making decisions. And I had done a white paper on the importance of the White House Office of Consumer Affairs, which ended up going by the wayside, which I was disappointed in. And on Election Day, I got out the vote, but I was too sick to go to the victory party. So I went, my friend, I met this woman who's a very good friend of mine now. She was at my house last week. And she said, come back at 6 and John will be in the office. And I stopped in and I gave him the paper that had been sent to him through somebody. And I said to John, I didn't get to meet you that night because I worked getting the vote out, but I was too sick to come to the party. And he calls up somebody at transportation and says, sends my name over. And the next thing you knew is I had an interview and ended up being chief of the consumer information at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration.
I guess the irony is during the Clinton administration, so the secretaries would have been Pena and Slater.
Slater, I'm still close to.
But not Norman Mineta, who's from San Jose, which would have been the Bush administration.
Right. And I was disappointed because one of the things, because of the way the Gore-Bush stuff ended, I actually was offered a job at transportation, but didn't get it because I served in the Clinton administration. He wasn't supposed to say that. And I had met Norm, and we had a nice visit, and I knew his wife because I was on a Dress for Success board, and she was on the board. So, but it didn't happen. So that was, yeah. So, and Pena went back to Denver, and Slater, I'm in touch with Slater. You know, he stayed quite active, keeping us all together.
Now, before he was secretary, he was head of the highway administration, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, one of the other exhibits I've worked on is the interstate highway system in Georgia and the roads, paving the roads to the future.
Right.
So all these things are coming together. So tell me what you were involved. What was your responsibilities at NHTSA? What did a normal day look like for you?
Okay, so I was
office?
in charge of the drunk driving prevention program, seatbelt safety, and we had the 800 hotline and crash tests.
Did you do the crash test dummies? That was you?
Yeah, I have a picture in crash dummies. I worked with the ad council. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
If I will take a picture of me as a crash test and send it to you.
I mean that because that was such a again growing up in the early '90s, those commercials were just. It was right up there with the frying egg and the pan. This is your brain on drugs.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool.
So I did that stuff. And the other big issue, and it was funny because I just talked about that with somebody, was that's when we discovered that airbags, having the child safety seats in the front seat, and the airbag going off, we had some. And so that was the hot topic. And, the visor things.
Yeah, the warning stickers up on the visor. Yeah.
Yeah, I worked on that. Okay. So getting kids in the back seat until they're 12, I did that. And the other night, our neighbors, we had a community party, and our neighbor kids came with us. And the 8-year-old didn't have her booster seat, and her big sister, and once you're 8, you don't need it anymore.
8 years or 80 pounds or something like that. 40 or something like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
and she's not quite 40 pounds. And I said to her, well, I worked on that law. She's 8 years old. We're going 1 mile, and she's probably 38 pounds. And I said, it will be fine. She can wear her seatbelt.
Put some rocks in your pocket and hop in.
So that was just kind of funny. So that was where kids in the back seat came, and because the back seat is the safest thing. The other thing that I did is worked with AAA, co-sponsored a pamphlet called "Buying a Safer Car," which highlighted our crash tests and that kind of thing. And the other interesting thing about the 800 line was it didn't take a lot of complaints, getting people to call. So if your car was stalling, it would take 3 or 4 complaints before you'd bring in the car company. And they always say the recalls are voluntary because it's a big negotiation to make them happen. So they negotiate that. If it's your windshield wipers maybe spraying water a little too far, it might take 100 complaints before. So it's a very serious avenue to find out what's happening with cars.
Were you ever involved in a mandatory recall during your time at NHTSA? Did it ever escalate that far?
Well, they probably are all mandatory, but for public relations purposes, it's voluntary.
I see.
So
I
very
see.
similar. And I mean, and Dan was at the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and we were both really responsible. In occasionally, our two bosses got together, like on bike safety and things like that, because we had overlap. But we were very good about not discussing those things at home,
Sure.
which is I find amazing with some of the stuff that's going on today. I mean, I wouldn't do that. So, so those are the kind of things that we did. And we had some grants that went out. So, I was an off-site instructor when I worked for the foundation for Purdue University. We had an internship program, and so I found people to pay interns and have summer experience in the consumer field in California. And so, like, Purdue got a small grant to sort of promote some of the programs that we were trying to get more information on, like seatbelt safety or the crash test things. So those are the kind of things. The other thing that I did is sometimes I was a fix-it person for other agencies, or like Linda Daschle was in charge of FAA at the time, and she wanted to have seatbelts mandatory the whole time you were on the airplane, and child safety seats for children. And so I took my consumer contacts from a professional organization for business consumer people, and I said, okay, what we need to do is have them come in for the day. We have to be professional. We'll chip in and provide them lunch. So we went to Costco and provided them lunch. And it was a very interesting meeting that we had to take back. It wasn't what she wanted to hear. But the airlines say, we're on board with passengers keeping their seatbelts fastened the whole time. And the problem is if you regulate it, then we've got to do it your way rather than our corporate way. And to this day, if you get on an airplane, what's the message? And then
Unless you're, while you're seated, keep your...
Yeah.
And we've seen lots of news stories about why that is the way it is.
And then the child safety seats, the problem was that they weren't universal, and if they didn't fit in the seat and you showed up with them and you had paid for a seat, you were going to cause a problem for the airline. And so they had to accept that. And at that point, they were working on a universal child safety seat that I don't think ever came to fruition.
No, at least not when I had, not when our daughter was that age.
And they were looking at a couple of prototypes, and I worked on a press conference for Slater on one that, but they were never able to come, and that's really sad because it would be nice.
Oh yeah,
because they're hard to put in. I don't have to tell you.
I can remember, having to go to the police station and get the little tutorial.
Right.
Now it becomes second nature once you've pulled them in, pulled them out, a few times. But and every one of them are different.
Right. I learned that, and one of the things that I did is occasionally the police stations would do a child safety seat thing, and I staffed the secretary when he would come out and do those in various community or seatbelt check or things like that.
Well, a funny aside, my brother is a police officer, and when they were having my nephew, my brother was struggling with the child safety seat, and my sister-in-law, his wife, to encourage him to try harder, said, I guess I'll just have to take it down to the firehouse and have one of the firemen put it in. And he figured it out.
Actually, this is really funny. One day we were stuck waiting for somebody, and we couldn't get the seat in at the airport. That was how to be. I got one of the guys to try and help us. And that was a way to be able to stand when the plane was an hour late, because it took him an hour to put it in. That's just a funny aside.
Right. Well, you've talked about some of the successes, but were there any initiatives that you worked on, you felt really strongly about that weren't, other than maybe the child safety seat on airplanes? Were there initiatives at NHTSA that, for one reason or another, didn't come to fruition or didn't succeed, and to the extent that you had hoped?
I've got to think about that. Probably when I go home, I'll think of something. At NHTSA,
Well, it's a good thing that you can't. It's not readily.
NHTSA probably not. Just well, actually, our administrator at the time, who was a ER doc at Emory University, wanted us to change the word accident to crashes, because he felt very strongly.
Very British. Collisions, not
Yeah.
accidents.
He felt very strongly that responsible drivers they're not accidents. They're crashes.
Somebody's at fault here, right?
And he wanted to get the word accident out of the vocabulary for car crashes, and that didn't work.
Just didn't go anywhere.
Right. So that was probably a failure in the sense that I couldn't meet his vision.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's, and then I can't think of anything else.
Yeah, like I said, that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Well, tell me about your work with Vice President Gore. You served on a committee that he chaired.
He had the Reinventing Government program, and so I got to spend, I think, a year there.
Oh, wow.
On loan. And so we were working on all sorts of things, like making things in plain English, writing things.
So like jargon-free language? Yeah, okay.
Just real clear, not government-ese.
We could use you here at libraries and in higher ed sometimes.
Well, writing Stan's forte. It isn't my forte. So those were the kind of things. And he was out doing a lot of making government better. And he had something called the Hammer Award. And we got one at NHTSA for one of our programs of the car crash program and information like that. So agencies would put in applications and would be awarded a box with a hammer, which we probably have somewhere, and everybody on the committee would get a pin that was a hammer.
Okay.
But he was trying to make government better, and that's where I saw Al Franken. So he would have a press conference as some of these things would happen. So it was kind of a variety of things that we did. He had trying to get government agencies to work better together was another one of the committees where, you had similar things and you would pull together a conference or a program for the community. Sort
of a classically technocratic New Democrat, Clinton Gore kind of approach.
Right, definitely.
Did you ever interact with President Clinton at that same proximity as you did Vice President Gore?
I've met President Clinton many times, and I met Gore because I did advance on the Gore campaign.
Did the 2000 campaign?
I did media advance.
Okay.
So where you have to get the media in hotels and food and alcohol.
Oh.
One of the funny stories is Nauvoo, Illinois, where the Mormons are, having wine and beer and for them at the hotel.
Back when one campaigned in Illinois.
Right. And we were in Iowa on the river. And so there wasn't enough room in Keokuk, Iowa, so I had some of the people there. And the winery across the street from the Mormon church had their wine that they tried to serve was like Manischewitz. But anyway, so it would be my job to get them there. And too bad Dan isn't here. He would tell you. So Dan met me in Detroit on one of these missions, and he ended up driving the baggage truck because there wasn't anybody else to take it on the tarmac. And we got there late at night and got to bed about 4 and got the first call at 6. So he was going to watch football, and we were going to have dinner together. So he had dinner, and we went out late, got them, and then came back. This one was they needed their laundry done, so I had to take their laundry.
This is such a glamorous job you're describing here.
Yeah, I mean it's hard. He said, I thought you were goofing off. I mean, he was bringing me clean clothes and taking home dirty clothes for me. But anyway, but it was interesting to take the time. You go up, the vice president's plane lands first, and then you take the media out on a bus. But there's always the pool reporters.
Right, who fly with the candidate.
And so occasionally they would change them, so you'd have to change hotel reservations, and then you'd be taking a reporter all over town because his wife had FedExed something to the hotel that he was supposed to stay in, and you had to, it was, so, but I mean, and I stay active with the Clinton Foundation. As Dan probably told you, we just volunteered for the second time at the Clinton Global Initiative, which is an amazing thing. It's the best conference I've ever been to. And I came home this time because I've always talked about Jimmy Carter as being the best ex-president in the sense of what he's done with
the
Habitat
Carter Center and election monitoring and
Habitat for Humanity.
Yeah.
Well, Clinton is now rivaling him with all the NGOs and all the money they've raised and all the projects that they do all over the world. So I'm pretty proud to be part of that. And only after I retired did I kick myself for not working hard to be in the Obama administration. But I was looking at retirement, and I had a career job, and
well, that's a good point. So you were a political appointee for those 8 years of the Clinton administration. How did you make the transition? Now, I think you were in the Postal Regulatory Commission for sort of an interregnum period.
Right. Okay.
Tell me about transitioning out of being a political appointee, which happened obviously after the Florida recount and the Supreme Court.
So on January 20th at noon, you're out of a job, and you know that.
Yep.
I mean, I could not understand the people that had not planned their finances.
This is the accountant. This is your father talking.
I mean, you have a temporary job, and the fact that you didn't save money, and it was a little harder to get a job. So I had to how it works is that you keep your time and service for retirement. So your time and service, what you've contributed to.
So you've got your 8 years, give or take.
Okay, but you don't have status. So you have to apply as an outsider for a job. So when as a federal employee, as a hiring official, you get 3 lists when a group applies for a job. You get returning or internal candidates, you get veterans, and you get outside candidates. So I was an outside candidate.
Okay.
Now, I lucked out in getting a 1-year appointment to the Postal Regulatory Commission's Consumer Advisory Office for the 2001 rate case.
All right, explain what that is.
So whenever the post office needs more money, they go to the regulatory agency.
Okay.
And so I was looking at the consumer aspects. That's what I was invited to do that. And I signed an MOU that I knew I only had a job for a year. But they were willing to do that, and so I could apply as a status candidate for other jobs. But once I left there, because I hadn't been in the government 3 years, I was an outsider again. So it is complicated.
Yeah.
So anyway, but I worked on all sorts of things, and it was the beginning, Dan likes to say, the beginning of the forever stamp. We talked about that, and the Postal Service didn't want to do that because they thought people would hoard stamps. And instead of doing all these...
I'm sure there are some people who hoard stamps.
Oh, yeah, I bought an extra 100 stamps just before the rate went up, a whole 100.
Right.
Yeah, so, and it's been a super success. It probably saved them lots of money because I was gone by then. One of the things I got to do then is I suggested, I had a contact at USC, and so I got a graduate student to look at some of our issues, and arranged for the university paid for them to make a presentation to the commission, which was a huge thing. The commission didn't really want to hear some of the things that they said about like changing. I mean, this is the group that started using emails and not using, but changing the hours that the post office was open. They had some really good ideas. So that was kind of a really fun experience. So those were the kind of things that I got to do. As usual, I handled complaints and things that came into the commission because that's was my forte.
Now, were you at the Regulatory Commission during September 11th and the anthrax attacks? Or did
Anthrax, yes.
Did that impact your work or
it was a big deal.
Yeah.
People got tested. We had a choice at being at the regulatory agency. I didn't bother, but people started wearing gloves when they handled the mail. Yeah, so I was hired just after September 11th.
Okay.
But the anthrax was, I forgot about that. Yeah, it was an issue and a concern.
Right.
And so, people were wearing gloves and people were nervous about what came in the mail. And then one of the other things, I did have a couple of focus groups where people came in and talked about the Postal Service. And one of the things was some business people and nonprofits who were concerned. And I would say to them, come back, give us some ideas of what will work best. I mean, the Postal Service needs X amount of dollars. That's not going to change. We need to give them a budget. And they were really pleased to have that opportunity. I wasn't the head. I was just a worker bee.
Sure.
But those are the kind of things that I was brought in because I tried to look outside the box.
So from there, you were able to transition to a career position in
USDA.
And this would have been 2002, three?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what happened was, again, my year was up, and so then I had to apply like an outsider again, because when I was at the Postal Regulatory Commission, I could apply as an insider because I was a government employee.
Okay.
But I didn't have my 3 years in as a career. Okay. So
Ouch.
Yeah. So as Dan said, it was a painful time. Financially I was fine, but I was.
You needed something to do.
I wasn't very good at that. One of the things I did is I did some volunteering because I didn't want to. I almost got hired by somebody working with schools. He really just wanted my contacts, and it was a third of what I was making. And so I would rather volunteer my time because I didn't want to affect my qualifications for a GS-15. So I did a lot of volunteering, and I was on the Suited for Success or Suited for Change board where it helped women get back in the workforce. And
Was that a Metro DC?
Yeah, it was like Dress for Success.
Okay.
So I did those things and just applied for jobs, and I got on to Food and Nutrition Service. So my background, health, the whole 9 yards, and spent 4 years there, and then I had a chance to get detailed to the Commerce Department, thanks to who Dan knew, and I got to be the ombudsman from the transition from analog to digital TV.
Right.
So we both kind of worked on that. That was NTIA, the National Telecommunication Information Agency's role, and that was real challenging because I took all the phone calls, and what was hard was if you moved to 10 Front Street, after somebody had lived there who got a converter box, you weren't eligible. So I had to do all the legal, like you can ask your friends, all the legal ways to get around it, and had a good rapport with the agency, and people weren't happy. So there were many challenges, and Dan didn't have the same constraints, and they would get extra coupons
Right.
and hand them out, where I didn't have access because I wasn't out in the field.
Right.
And so just talking about how it worked, and so that was a real challenge.
So you weren't on the road show.
No.
Because Dan was on the road for a year and a half.
Right.
And you were back in Washington.
Yeah. A couple of times though, he would come. I would leave in the morning, and he'd come home at night. I would be out giving a speech somewhere.
Like ships passing in the night.
But mine would be a short duration.
Sure.
But it was, I really liked that kind of stuff because I was good at working around and trying to make things work. Mm-hmm. And I'd say, well, ask, some of your neighbors may not. There were all sorts of little ways you could do it without breaking the law. And then I was having Sam Farr and I would have lunch probably once a year or something. And Sam says, well, why aren't we just giving them TVs? And I said, Sam, you guys appropriated the
You know how much is in the bill?
Yeah, you appropriated the bill. And but anyway, so it was very interesting working with the agencies, and so that I enjoyed that.
Now, when you came back to USDA, originally you had been in the Food and Nutrition Service,
Right.
so food pyramid, school lunch, that sort of thing. But you came back and you were in the rural
Development. I went back. I did, people moved around, and I decided to leave because
Sure.
They put a crazy political in. So I took advantage of the opportunity to get detailed and go. I mean, that's part of, you take advantage of those opportunities.
Okay, and what year would this have been?
2008.
2008. Okay.
Yeah.
So. Okay.
The campaign was going on, and
Yeah.
And so I was lucky enough to go over to rural development when we were trying to get broadband around.
Okay.
So, and then again, I got to be on the road for 30 days with our hearings on giving grants for broadband and things like that, grant review. So I really liked working in rural America. And then because the Democrats came in, and because I was a Clinton appointee, I got to be part of what the secretary called his strike force team. And the strike force team was mainly working in rural America to get broadband out there. And I learned a lot about rural America, which you probably know this. You can tell how poor a community is if there isn't a bank.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
And so I did some work in Arkansas. What happened is I was there for a transportation reunion with Rodney, and went to Arkansas was one of our things, and went to our local office on a Saturday, and they came in and we went and looked at all these places, and so I started working with them and helped get a small grant for Cotton Plant, Arkansas, which was famous for all jazz singers in the 30s.
So this would have been the Delta.
The Delta. I'm trying to think. Is it jazz? I'm not a good musician, but it's whatever the big popular music was in the 30s with African Americans.
Like blues?
Blues,
Okay.
yeah. And so Cotton Plant was real famous, and it turned out that Rodney Slater used to spend his summers there. His grandma was for there. But anyway, I got to know them, and I said they wanted to open a food pantry. And so I got them a small grant for that. And in fact, I was meeting with our director on the day of the earthquake, and the undersecretary said to me, I never wanted to be an earthquake again with a Californian, because I was pretty nonchalant.
Is this the earthquake that was up in
Washington.
D.C.? Yes, that closed down the National Cathedral for a while.
Right,
It
yeah.
shook some of the gargoyles off.
Our building.
I think we actually felt it down here. It was
pretty,
for the East Coast.
It was
pretty serious.
It was pretty well, and the rafters you could see. So
See, I grew up on the New Madrid fault, so we were always drilled on how the big one was right around the corner, and it very well may be. It's just
Right.
not a super active fault in the way of the
Right.
San Andreas.
So those are the kind of things. But I
Yeah.
did a couple of things. They had a conference in Burpee Seeds at the time. I don't remember how I learned about this, but they were donating to build welcome home gardens for veterans. And so the food bank and cotton plant had an annual conference, and I got the woman to be a speaker and got a bunch of seeds donated for them, and evidently for several years after that. So I did several things like that, and after I retired, the food bank finally opened, but we went out to look at it, and there was mold so it delayed the project. But anyway, it finally opened, and it was small, but it was the beginning. And so that was great. And Rodney said, well, when it opens, let me know. So he actually brought his mom.
No.
Because they were from there. And he was, he's still a very hometown guy, even though he's done quite well in Washington.
Right.
But so those are the kind of things that we did. And then grant review, telling people how to write grants. Saying, call our agency, we can talk about the process, but we can't help you do it. But one of the rewarding things to me was one year when Congress didn't appropriate our funds till late, we got to go back. We had a whole pile of people that actually qualified but not enough money, and we got to go back and award grants to those people, and many of them were small towns and didn't have grant writers, so that the projects probably were going to be more successful than the ones that had grant writers, in my opinion. I always want to say, but they weren't as well written.
Sure.
And so we were able to give a small town a grant for a telemedicine program where the money went to the small town, and they were hooked into a major hospital so that they could triage people there and get them stable before they had to transfer them. So those were the kind of things. And we were able to do that when things, they had all passed, but not enough money. So that was great. One of our grants was Community Connect, and that's where you find like a small town agency. You have a computer. I don't know if it still has this program. A station where there are computers for people to go use, and the local community gets internet for a couple of years for free. One of them was at the bottom of the Supai tribe in Arizona, and we were going out there as a follow-up, and I like to tell this story because it was not a boondoggle. We had to be on a helicopter at 10 o'clock in the morning, and we had to be out by noon because there was a snowstorm coming. So long enough to meet with the tribal leadership, see the program, and learn that many of the kids who had to go off to boarding school and high school were now able to get their high school education at home. So those were the kind of things that our broadband program did. And
when I think of rural broadband, I don't automatically think of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Why did the USDA have a broad? Why was broadband going through there as opposed to like commerce or I don't know,
development
something else?
handles small communities. We have housing, we have water, and we have utilities. So it's and utilities. Utilities includes water, electric, and the electric reunification programs as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So it's so it would have been telecommunications in the past,
Okay.
and so that's how that ended up there.
Okay.
And so that, and there's also business, so business grants and loans. So that's how that ended up there.
Okay.
And that was, as I said, really rewarding to go and see. And the challenge with the tribal organization is their leadership changes on an annual basis.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Or whatever tribal. Well,
Oh,
this particular tribe, it was an annual, and so you get different leaderships all the time. So that made things like they have a hotel there. They only have one that books up, and turns out. So one of the things I tried to do. Oh, here's a failure. I tried to do was get somebody from the university UNLV, who has a big hotel program, to do an internship program. But it wasn't big enough because they have all these companies that come through.
Right.
But also, it turns out it's not exactly the safest place down at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, which I had no idea. And so those are things, and like the mail still comes in by donkey.
The burros?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was the last one. So we actually sent ourselves a postcard from there. But I mean, you know, so, and I like to share with people because people say, oh gosh, you got to go to the bottom of the Grand Canyon. But it's good to say, hey, this wasn't a boondoggle, because everybody thinks you're on a boondoggle. So, but that was, those were probably two significant programs that we worked on and getting people in a better living situation.
Right.
But I really liked working on food deserts and, you know, the strike force. That was
Would that have been Tom Vilsack?
Yeah.
Secretary, well, who is currently the Secretary of Agriculture again.
right.
So
He was really funny. In 2016, I was working the Democratic convention on Radio Row, and he was coming in for an interview, and he became like my best buddy, even though I had met him many times, but I wasn't a political.
Right.
So he was so excited that I had worked at agriculture, and it was just kind of a funny experience. But yeah, but he was great. Another good story to tell about him was a really tough year for employees. And one day he had wine and beer after hours, and everybody came. And we had a group of special needs people that delivered the mail who were great. Our mail always got where it was supposed to be. But Theo used to like to crash our parties. And Theo had worked there like 22 years. And he said, you know, I've never met a secretary. And I said, come with me. And Secretary Vilsack didn't know me. I introduced him to the secretary, and he had a Redskins lanyard on. And the secretary went right away and talked to him about that. And for the next month, he'd stop by my office every day and say, I met the secretary. And, I mean, it was a big deal to him.
Right.
And he never would have gone up. But those are the kind of things that, anyway, that was an story.
No, it's a fantastic story. Now, you decided to step away from government in 2014.
Right.
Is that right?
2015.
2015.
I was a year after Dan.
So what did Dan's retirement precipitate that, or it was just a collective decision that, you know?
We were just ready to retire.
Yeah.
I probably could have stayed on another year or two, but I was ready. To there, you know. Sometimes it's just time to go, and I didn't want to go do anything new.
Right.
We wanted to travel, and
Yeah.
we did it right. I mean, everybody says you shouldn't retire at the same time. So Dan was off for a year, getting used to it, and then I retired.
I'd never heard that. I didn't know that. Perhaps I'm not at that stage of my career yet. But
Financial advisors sometimes suggest that because it's an adjustment.
Sure.
And so, you know, Dan had his share of
Interesting.
sleeping late and cooking dinner.
Well, we were talking a little bit before, and I talked to Dan about this, about, the perception of civil servants, of government employees, are perhaps held in lower esteem than they had been in the past. What do you think accounts for that, and how do you think we sort of move beyond that?
I'm going to be honest. I think some of the stuff that the Republicans have done, that Trump says we can get rid of all these people. These are the nuts and bolts that hold government together. You have the Hatch Act. You have restraints of what you can and cannot do as a government employee. But why I liked it is I tried consulting, and I didn't like putting a price on my head. If you come to me and you want to say, I want to travel or I want to do this, I want to help you. I want to give you my advice. And, the same thing, if you want to buy a piece of real estate, I'll give you my advice, but I'll tell you to check with your accountant. I'll give you a list of things that you need to do, because that's not what I do for a living. I'm a networker. I'm probably one of the best networkers I know. I'm always networking. And
between you and Ann, you guys, you know everybody.
Right. So I liked that, and I liked being a government employee. I liked you get you have a chance for a quality of life if you're in a good agency. You have a quality of life. I always say, if you're an attorney, you can go to the government and you can get time off. You get so much time off. Like you at the university.
Yep.
You've got the same kind of situation. It's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Is that, and when I taught personal finance, is success is earning enough money to do the things that you want to do. You don't need to have, we don't need to have the same thing. All this keeping up with the Joneses, or you don't. You just need to have enough to make a difference of what you want to do. And if all you want to do is go to work, have a roof over your head, then you're successful. And that's what I feel about government, that I can buy forever stamps and know I worked on that. I can get in a car and see the label and know that I worked on that. Somebody can come to me and say, I just got benefit from the lemon law. That makes a difference in the quality of life. And advice for people, I often say to people, we were in St. Kitts, and I didn't know there are 4 medical schools on the island of St. Kitts with a lot of Americans. And I was talking to this guy about, you should look at going into the military, because you'll be a vet. You go in as an officer, and you'll have, they'll pay for some of your schooling, and you have to serve for so many years. But the experience you get is great, but I won't make as much money. Well, if he went to a financial planner, he probably would find out by the time he pays off his loans and gives the government so much time. So I think and most of the people that I know in government are very good professionals and very talented. And sometimes it's sad that it's such a rap. And I think we're not teaching civics in school anymore, so we don't have the 3 different branches of government that people no longer understand. And I think if more people, like I never went to the state capitol in California because I was in Los Angeles until I started lobbying. And if you went to your state capitol and your U.S. capitol or Washington, D.C., and you saw how things worked, and my cousin, he was a successful builder, building $1 million homes throughout his career. He's 82. He only has Social Security. He never saved any money. My particular feeling is it's the time. It's what people are thinking. And I think for college graduates, it's a good time to consider government service because there aren't as many applicants for each job. Knowing that you might at the bottom of the rung, but you have opportunities. And once you get in, like Dan says, once you get in the federal government, you can, once you have your 3 years in, you can go anywhere.
Right.
And I also think working on political campaigns is a good opportunity. Starting in a local office, doing your internships, all of that.
Stuffing on envelopes and cold calling and knocking on doors. You meet a lot of people.
I don't cold call anymore because people don't like it, but I do. I do go door to door.
I was more of the stay at the office and do the mail and
Right.
more logistical stuff.
Right.
And let others go out and do the
So
the
I mean, if
face-to-face.
you're counseling students, I would say this is a good time to look at government.
Well, I think that is a good message to leave everyone with. And
I'm going to leave you
yeah,
one more.
Kathie, please do.
One more. I think it's important that you get to know your local elected officials.
I
And people don't do that. I make sure to get to know them, and you don't have to contribute. In campaign time, they're out there, they want to meet you.
That's right. Yeah, everybody thinks nationally and federally when
Yeah,
most of the time it's your state rep or
Right.
county commissioner.
yeah.
So just a fount of wisdom and good advice, and thank you for making the trip and taking the time.
I hope I offered something.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much.
But you're going to come visit us.
Well, I'll try. Well, thank you very much, Kathie.
And